And now you can see it's changing to the red along the edge here. Another trick I do with this thing is use the Math Scalar box step. This thing's kind of like a limiter or a control that I throw on a bunch of textures in case they start getting a little bit weird. Its output is always between 0 and 1. So it'll scale everything that goes in between your in and out points, and everything will come out at 0 or 1. Never anything outside of that. And it's got an in or beginning point. That's my lowest value. So 0 is going to come out as 0, 1 is going to come out as 1. If I make this thing a smaller value, it's like say -1, it's going to scale that down to 0. So show you what that does. Throw in a little color tool. So you can see its output on that little node there. If I change that to -1, it just brightened up the center of that. So that's basically coming out at a 0.5 now, because it just got squashed into that zone. So it's thinking, okay, everything from -1 to 1 is coming out from as 0 to 1. And the same thing happens here. If I go with a higher value, I'm squashing that down even more. Or I can actually use like a 0.5 and a 0.2, and you really sharpen that thing up. So now I'm basically increasing the contrast of whatever's going into it. So what I like to do is leave this at 1 and bring this down to like -0.2. That just brightens the center section up a little bit. And I'll show you why that works nice. Let's turn this off for a second. I'm just going to throw this into the reflection. Oops, let's try this first. There's the Fresnel unmodified. I'm going to drop this back down to 1.2, which is a nice hint. So it's just a very slight tint of a reflection here and almost nothing here. If I take it out of the box step, I've increased the reflection here, but I left it the same at the edge here. So I can use this to just dial this thing in, make it more reflective, without having to do anything fancy with the actual Fresnel itself. So bring this back down to 1.2. So let's plug this back in. Run this into the paint specular. -1. Now it's bringing the red back in. -2. So it's just a nice little enhancement to the actual Fresnel calculation itself. So I can dial in exactly what I want. I don't have to worry about it being physically accurate that the Fresnel node does. If I'm just using that as a guide. So, got nice metallics. Turn off the roughness, nice and sharp. Blurred, but it's got a nice little metallic look to it. If I have a bump, so like in there, it's like I can take these. Let's go back to the wood texture. Take the specular down a little bit. Now you notice what it's doing here. So I'm going right from the wood to the specular. So this is actually another one of these blends, where this one's saying pick the color or the paint color or the specular color and mixing them. This thing's actually doing the same thing with the specularity itself. So I can use the paint color itself, which it's actually doing the physical calculation. If it's 0% specular, you're going to see all your diffuse shading. If you bring it the other way around, it's going for all the reflections, and your diffuse shading is almost completely gone. Though it is mixing in because of the paint and specular color. Kill that. So another thing, throw Fresnel into this. And I'm going to change my specular color back to white. And let's darken this wood a bit. Image node works a little different from regular images. You have this opacity and you have an invert. Well, an invert doesn't actually invert your texture. It inverts it to with the background. So now your background is over top of the foreground, which is your image. Now foreground is over top of the background. So if you want to make a negative image, make that white and then subtract. And that's how you get a negative out of this thing. But since I'm working with like normal blending, I want to make this thing darker. I just make sure I have a black back here and drop that down, and it's getting darker. So let's bring that roughness back down again. So you can see the reflections nice and high around the edge, but not so much in the middle. And again, I can tweak this here. So it's starting to look like a nice glossy wood ball. But one of the things I like to do is with paint and specular, take this off, especially for wood, because its specular tends to have the same color as the wood itself. So I'm going to say 0%. So its specular color is now the paint color. So I'm not using this, or I can actually just take my wood and throw that in the specular color, and there's no difference because now this color is the same as this. And if I take the specularity off completely, it just looks like the standard ball, but now my specularity is also affecting that, which is really handy when you start modifying this. So I'm going to add another node. So I could put two image nodes in there and have one bright one and one dark one. Or I can just take that one image node and scale it. So a little vector node, plug that color into this, and again I'll run it right into the diffuse shading so you can see exactly what's going on. That's the raw color, just like putting the image node directly into diffuse shading. But now I can brighten that thing up or down with this little scale. So if I bring this down to 0%, I get black. Yep. This one's faster though. Just marginally. Because it's only set up to do exactly this one thing. Color tool can do a lot of other things. But yeah, I'll pull that up because I do use it a lot. Because color tool does a few other nice things. Again, there's the raw color, but it gives you hue controls. So I can change the hue of that texture. Saturation. Brightness. So that's basically doing the same thing that the scale was doing. And contrast. So yeah, let's use that instead because it gives me a little more control. So it's a 20, that's good. Okay, so I'm going to take that, put that into my paint color. And let's change that hue a little bit, make it more of a cherry wood. Over here. Whoops. Okay, I forgot what I was doing. Okay, yeah, why is, yeah, it should be working. Could be VPR not working right.
Well, you also plug the...
Well, yeah, my blending should be going between these two colors. Paint. Specular. Okay, that's 100%. Oh, there it goes. So, okay, so I need the paint. Okay, so my specular color on this, which is hard to see right now, is going to be this. The base color is the darker version. And I'm going to take that Fresnel, bring that back into paint specular. It's not doing a whole lot. Paint specularity. There we go. It's a very subtle effect. It probably won't even show up on that screen. But what I'm getting is a highlight that's going to match this color on this darker base color. So it's hard to tell. Let's brighten up my light. Whoa.
Ooh, too bright.
Yeah, but you can see it now. Yeah. But basically, this little highlight right now is showing the original colors. The shading is showing everything else. If I roughen that up, I'll spread that highlight a little bit, because wood's actually fairly rough. And let's add some bump into that thing too.
Dave, if you were working in linear space, would it be any different? Anything you're doing here?
Not really. Like I don't know what the color space is on this image. It's old. So I'm assuming that would mean it would be linear, because it's an old IFF from like version 1. And I actually am working in linear space on this right now. It's linear.
You know, I can't help but to ask, do you ever think about using this for like the surface of Jupiter?
This one, no. This was because there's only a couple things in here I'd be using for it, and everything else would be turned off. But it'd just be extra overhead. For Jupiter, I actually use Kappa. It gives a nice little softening of the shading.
All you need is a knot in the wood and it almost looks like.
Let's increase that bump, 300. And let me change my light a little bit so it shows off a bit more. Go to my favorite light, dome. Move it to center. Okay, for using dome light, if you want to duplicate sunlight, set the angle to 0.25 degrees. And all your shadows will be exactly what you get from direct sunlight. Which means, as the further away you get, that softens up, but it softens exactly the same way. Other than that, the dome light works exactly like a distant light. Doesn't matter where it is, it's just its angle. And the only thing that's added is the shadow softening. The higher this value, the softer your shadows get. And it's measured from like the zenith to the horizon on that dome. So it's like you do 0, you basically have a distant light. All your light's coming from the very center of that dome. And show you that dome here. Got to turn on a little. It's that little dome right there. 0 is that point. 90 is down here, and everything else is measured in between. So because the sun and the moon, they actually fill like half a degree of the sky. You divide that by half, and you get 0.25, because that sun would actually fill up a little circle about that big around. So 0.25. And I got a nice little soft shadow.